do some of that work. But, this problem that I'm talking about today kind of fell into my lap about 2 or 3 years ago, and it's my kid's fault. So I have a daughter who's now a junior in high school and a son who's just a freshman in high school, and they are part of our local high school's cross-country distance running program. And so a couple years ago, as my daughter was coming up through the ranks, they have a good team. It's like state championship quality team at our school. And the coach was lamenting that we just can't compete against the big schools in the state, and we're a small school. And even though we're really talented, the big schools just overwhelm us with numbers. And he had gone so far as to take a complaint to the governing board of the Ohio Athletic Association for high schools, and they politely listened and then dismissed his complaint. But he had no evidence, right? He had just this gut feeling like, hey, this isn't fair. But there was no way to quantify that, and so got the wheels turning. And a couple years later, once my schedule freed up, I was like, I'm going to tackle this and see what I can find. So that's what I'm going to talk about. And to embarrass my kids, they are featured in known photographs on this here. So let me turn this thing on. Here we go. Okay, so this is my son. So one of the keys in this is talking about divisions. This idea of if you have students in high school, you know that all the high schools don't compete against each other. They break them up into divisions and so forth. And the divisions are generally based on school size. So the first thing I did was just go get all the data I could on school enrollment numbers. This is available on the public websites for Ohio State education system. And I was concentrating mostly on female students because at the time my daughter was in the program, and boys and girls compete in different, entirely separate programs, even though they're the same team. We found some interesting things. So of the 735 schools that are recognized as high schools in the state of Ohio, the smallest is the Chaffin Career Center in Cleveland, which has 16 female students. And the largest is Mason, which is a high school, I think, in the Cincinnati area, which has 3,500 students total, 728 of whom are females. And so there's quite a variation in school population size. And there we are, we're Granville, so I put us on there. That's where I live. And we have roughly 870 students, 433 of whom are female students. So this gives you an idea. So, of course, I want to visualize these, so I put them on a histogram plot and just say, okay, where are all the schools? And in this case, I only took the schools that actually fielded a cross-country team. So 735 schools in Ohio, but some of them are so small, especially the small ones, they don't field a team. There are 501 teams that fielded a cross-country team, 501 schools. And they range from roughly 100 students, female students, up to 1,728. So this gives you an idea. And so the question that the Ohio Governing Athletic Association faces is, how do you create 3 divisions out of this? So we have 3 divisions in cross country. Interestingly, there are 7 in football, and there's 4 in basketball, and 4 in volleyball, but there are 3 in cross country. So what they do, of course, is they use this method called method of equal numbers, or division by equal numbers. They create 3 divisions of equal size. So in this case, 501 divided by 3, 168 teams in each division. So the 168 biggest teams are, can you see over this? The 168 biggest teams are in the orange division, Division 1, that's the largest division. And then Division 2 has 168 middle teams, and Division 3 has 168 of the smallest teams. So those are the 3 divisions. And the impetus for this is, here's us. Last year, we were the very smallest school in Division 1 with 433 female students. Literally 1 student over the count. If we had 1 fewer female students, we would have been in Division 2. And our coach had ethically questioned whether it was reasonable to sacrifice a student in our school district to move the cross-country team into Division 2, but we decided that was not a good idea. And there's Mason, who wins a lot of state championships with that many. This is total school population, not just the women. So 3,500 students versus 850. And so this was known, and this was what our coach got upset about, right? It's like, hey, Mason's 4 times bigger than Granville. Is it fair? But how do you measure fairness? So that's the question. How much of an advantage is it to be at a big school like Mason that has 4 times as many students as it is to be at what we'll call a small school, even though it's Division 1, a small school like Granville? So how do you measure this? So here's what I did. I had two steps to this process. One was a modeling phase, where I collected data and built a model of running performance. That was phase 1. And then phase 2 is a simulation phase, where I did Monte Carlo simulation rollouts of running performances. And you can do this in cross country because they're individual performances. So it ended up working out really beautiful. So it's a really simple approach. So the modeling phase comes first, and I collected running data that I could get on high school age female running performances. So Healthline is a company that collects 5K race times. They collect running times for males and females, but I took the female ages 14 to 18, and there turned out to be about 10,000 recorded 5K race times on their website, and I could get that data for that. And I also got permission to use Strava data, do some Strava data mining, and there were 90 million records on Strava for females, a 5K race time, and I filtered that down to the age group. And so I collected all this data, and I got this distribution of running per mile race paces for high school age female runners. So you have the very fastest runners down here at under 6 minutes per mile, and the slowest over 20 minutes per mile. And for high school age females, the average is about 12 minutes per mile. And this is just general population. This isn't like athletes or anything. So that's roughly what it looks like. And I tried to fit a couple different statistical models to this, and it ended up being the beta distribution. So this is a beta probability distribution, and it fits the model really, really well, very low error rate. So this was part one. We got a beta distribution model from the data for high school age females. Then part two. So in part two is the Monte Carlo simulation, and I did this in 2 phases. So the first phase is let's look at just statistical measures of the runners on the team, like the fastest runner and the second fastest runner and third fastest runner. In the cross country, you get 7 runners on a team. And so what I did is I simulated 1,000 different seasons, 1,000 different years. And for each of those years, I used that beta distribution to draw the entire school population of females for each school. So every school gets an entirely new set of females every year. And then we pick the 7 fastest runners, and we assume those are going to be the runners for the cross-country team. It doesn't always work out that way in real life, but this is what we're trying to do. And then just what do those 7 fastest runners look like, and how much of a difference is there between a big school and a small school? So this is a pictorial view of what I just said. There's our distribution. For Mason, I'm going to sample that distribution 1,728 times. That's their school population. I picked the 7 fastest, and there's their cross-country team. Now, Mason's real cross-country team has like 50 women on it, and it's huge. They can field like 4 teams. Granville has like 10 runners on their team, but anyways. So I sampled 433 times for Granville, picked the top 7, and then there's that. So then I repeat this 1,000 times for 1,000 years, and see what I get. So the first thing I was interested in is, well, what's the difference between the fastest runner from Mason and the fastest runner from Granville? What does that look like? So this is what it looks like. Team 1 is the big team, so this is Mason. So the distribution of those 1,000 different points from Mason is that histogram there. So on average, the Mason runner runs about 5:35 pace per mile pace if you draw from this sampling distribution. And this is their standard deviation. So they're pretty tightly clustered around that 5:35 pace, so, which is pretty accurate actually. So that's an elite level runner in high school for Ohio. Team 2, this is Granville. Their average pace was 5:48-ish for their fastest runner, which isn't too bad. Their spread's bigger, which you would expect because it's a smaller population of students that you're drawing from. And interestingly, so Mason's 4 times as large as Granville. You would expect them to be faster on average, right? So, and in 20% of the cases, the Granville runner is actually faster than the Mason runner. So there's overlap, you can see the distribution. And that works out exactly right? 4 times as often Mason has the faster runner than Granville. So it's like, what? This is what we'd expect. So there isn't an inherent unfair advantage in the fastest runner category. Well, what about runners 2 through 7? What about the other people on the team? So these are the same distributions over those 1,000 seasons. So here are the 7 runners for Mason, and here are the 7 runners for Granville. The dot is your average, so that's 5:35 pace, and what's that, about 5:40 pace or something like that, 5:46 pace or something. And the error bar is 1 standard deviation of what it looks like in that distribution. And so you can see the 2 fastest runner comparisons. That was the spread we had on the previous chart. And you can see the overlaps. There is overlaps. But because Mason is so much larger, the difference between the 1st and 7th runner is much, much smaller than it is for Granville. You see the much bigger distribution. In fact, the 7th fastest runner on the team for Mason is on average faster than the 2nd fastest runner for Granville. So because you score cross country running by the sum of the first 5 finishing places for a team, you know, even though Granville can field a runner that's competitive with Mason as a single runner for like a individual state title, as a team perspective, this is not looking good for a team like Granville, right? It's going to be really rare that this 5th place person is faster than the 5th place person over here, and you know, you're going to, yeah. So this was phase 1. So this already is pretty damning evidence that you know, it's not a fair situation. So phase 2 is I wanted to actually model the race scenario, the championship scenario, where at the end of the season, or a cross-country season, you have a district race that everybody's divided into districts. The 5 champions from the district race go on to their regionals. There's 4 regions in the state of Ohio. The 5 champions from the regional race go on to the state title, and there's 20 people at the state meet. So if you're a really good team, you would make it out of your districts into regionals. And if you're a really, really good team, you would make it out of your regionals into the states. And there's only 20 teams out of those 500 that make it to the state meet to compete. So it's pretty elite to just get to that level, let alone try to win a state title. So what I do is I'm trying to simulate this competition using the same kinds of things. And I want to count the number of state titles. I do this for 10,000 years, so I get a lot of data in my simulation, because it's Monte Carlo simulation. And here's what we get. How many state titles do you win for these different schools in Division I? This is Mason over here, that's school population size. So Mason over here with 1,728 students wins 850 of the simulated 10,000 state titles. They win literally 8.5% of the state titles, which is pretty nice. And this is Granville down here with 2 state titles. So out of the 10,000 state titles, Granville does win. Occasionally they win 2 of them, and so forth. But you can see, being big clearly is an advantage, right? And the other thing that comes out of this is if winning percentage were correlated with your size, you would see this graph being a straight line. You would see a linear relationship between size and your winning percentage, and that's clearly not happening here. So already, you know, wheels are turning about how can I measure this and so forth. So simulated and expected titles. So let me start with simulated, because this comes from the simulation. So here's Mason. There's their 850 state titles out of the 10,000 seasons. And here's Granville with 2 out of the simulation. Now, the expected number would be the proportion of state titles you should win based on the proportion of students you have at your school in all of Division I. So if you took Granville's like 3% of their population, of their 433 females form 3% of the population for the Division I as a state, then they should win 3% of the titles, right? Mason should win 4 times as many, 12% of the titles or something like that, whatever that works out to be. So if you do that computation, Mason should actually win 147 state titles based on just its size, and Granville should win 37. So clearly the simulation is showing that you're just going to win a whole lot more. This is the effective rank statistics. Once you start going beyond the first runner, you get to the second, third, fourth, fifth, the difference between your size ratio and your performance ratio grows. So I formed a normalized win rate. The normalized win rate is a division of those 2 bar graphs we saw on the other side. So I computed the win rate. That's your how often do you win in the simulation. I computed the expected win rate, which is how often you should win based on your school size, and I divided the 2 to get a normalized win rate. So your normalized win rate is the actual win rate versus your expected win rate. In the ideal system, this should be exactly 1.0 for every school. So every school should have a normalized win rate of 1.0 if it's a fair system. If you're above 1.0, you're winning more often than you should. And if you're below 1.0, you're losing more often than you should. So I formed this scale with color coding. So here it is. This is the ideal. Every school should have a normalized win rate of 1.0. And I just said it was acceptable to win up to 50% more than that. If you're in that range, that's, but I just call this acceptable, or 50% less than you should. So these are teams that are losing too often. Here, up to twice as often, between 50% and 100%, I call that marginal, right? You're winning twice as often as you should, or you're losing twice as often as you should. And once you get beyond that, it's just really unacceptable, right? You're winning way more than you should, or losing way more than you should. So you're either positively unacceptable or negatively unacceptable. So I use this color coding scheme to determine for each of the teams in Division I which ones are acceptable, which ones are marginal, and which ones are unacceptable. And so that's this plot. So I took all the schools, and there are 3 groups here. So this is Division I, the biggest schools. This is Division II, and this is Division 3. And I took the normalized win rate from each of those schools in their own little divisions. They compete for state titles separately, so state title here, state title there, state title there. And I just measured what's the normalized win rate for each of those schools. And you can see here's Mason. This is a normalized win rate of almost 6, so they're winning 6 times as often as they should. And Granville, I think, is that dot there. So there's even some schools that in the simulation are winning much less. But one of the things you can see, not very many schools in Division 1 actually have an acceptable normalized win rate. The Giants are winning so many races that literally 2/3 of these schools fall below a normalized win rate. So most of the schools are winning much less than they should. It's not a balance. It's not like half are winning more and half are winning less. The Giants are collecting all the wins, and literally half of the schools have an unacceptably low normalized win rate. So the small schools are just getting killed in this system. They have no chance whatsoever of winning a state title. It's the same effect in Division 2 and 3, but it's not as pronounced. So forth. We did all kinds of sensitivity analysis, and what we found is the ratio in student population between the largest and smallest is the largest explanatory factor, and that ratio is 4 times in the Division 1, it's 2 in Division 2 and Division 3. So you have a little bit more equity there. All right, so just a couple minutes I have left here. Some alternative methods. So we've established that it's not fair, but what could you do to improve it? This is sort of the part 2 of the research. You could create the divisions differently. You could use a different method for creating divisions. You can have more divisions so that the disparity within the division is less. And then there's this cap idea. So I'll talk about the cap idea in a second too. So I came up with 3 division methods. There's the method of equal numbers, where you take the students and you put the same number of teams, in each division. So that's what we have here. There's 168 teams in each division, and that's what their spread looks like. So here's the first 168, that's Division 1. This is the next 168, that's Division 2, and the last 168, that's Division 3. That's the method of equal numbers, equal numbers. And I said, well, what if you measure equal absolute difference? You make the difference between the largest and smallest in each division the same. So literally, you take this range and you chop it into thirds based on the count, and this is what you get. So the range is the size, but only 7 teams fall in Division 1, and 73 fall in Division 2, and 424 fall in Division 3. So that is just not going to work. It's not viable. So I didn't even run any experiments with this one, because it's just not going to work. Then the method of equal relative difference. So what if you take the ratio between the largest school in the division and the smallest school in the division, and you try to make that ratio the same for each 3 divisions? So then you end up with this division. So the ratio from here to here is like 2.4, the ratio from here to here is 2.4, and this is 2.4. And so it's kind of a compromise between them. You only get 75 schools up here, but they're all the big ones, and they're going to compete against themselves. You have 206 here, which is a fair number, and 221 down here, so you have a lot of small schools in that division. So those are 3 division methods. And then there's the cap rule. So there are 22 schools with more than 1,000 female students. So what if you made those 22 schools actually divide into 2 teams and compete separately? So same coach, same workouts, everything is the same, but when they actually go to a competition, they put on different jerseys and they compete, and you randomly assign the students to 2 teams. So in effect, it makes the school seem half as big. And there's 22 problem schools, so if you just take those 22 out of 501, those are the ones who have to suffer. Of course, you're going to get all kinds of complaints for this, but if you have students in high school, you know how this would not work. But it's an interesting idea. So 12 different experiments, 3 methods, a cap, yes or no, yes or no, yes or no, and whether if you have 3 divisions or 4 divisions. So I set up 12 experiments, and I ended up not doing these middle 4 because the method of equal differences was just not viable. So I actually did 8 experiments. So remember the acceptable versus marginal versus not marginal or unacceptable. So if you move just from 3 divisions to 4 divisions, and you look at the number of schools that have acceptable normalized win rates, it gets much bigger. So going to 4 divisions, no surprise, makes a big difference. And it also lowers the number of unacceptable. So we would expect that. Even if you retain equal numbers or any of the 3 methods, it works the same way. So definitely a recommendation for more divisions. It increases that group. So here is the 8 experiments. So there's a lot of things going on in here. Keep an eye on the green bars. A bigger green bar is better, right? That means more schools are getting an acceptable rating. These four methods are equal numbers, and these four methods are equal ratio. Right? This is 3 divisions, 4 divisions, 3 divisions, 4 divisions, 3 divisions, 4 divisions, 3 divisions, 4 divisions. So every time you move to a 4th division, the green bar gets higher, significantly higher. This is no cap. This is a cap. No cap versus cap. So the cap does make a difference. You can see in a lot of cases the cap makes a difference. It makes a small difference in some cases, and it makes a huge difference in other cases, but only in certain circumstances. So we tried all these different things. We measured the actual performance increases in each of these things. And just some recommendations. The conclusions moving forward would be the current method is unfair. There's a way to measure it. It's not fair. There's a statistically improbable chance that the small teams ever make it to the state title, let alone win one. Equity is highly sensitive to the population ratio between schools, and also we found the number of teams in the competition. And if you think about it, a small team has a very unlikely statistic of being a big team, but when you have to beat 2 big teams, and then 3 big teams, and 4 big teams, or 20 big teams, it makes it even more unlikely. So the more teams you add in the race, the less likely it is a small team wins. 4 divisions is better than 3. The cap is a good idea, definitely, even though nobody would like it. And the method of equal relative difference is only slightly better than equal numbers if there's also a cap in place and there are 4 divisions. So those are the conclusions. This is how my kids started out running. So we have a couple minutes before we're supposed to run down the hall. So any questions?
Yeah, so I live in a district where my son's high school has 200 students.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So
we empathize, right?
Right. So, and I think about this a lot, not in terms of cross country, but the sports that my son does, football, basketball, baseball, and the one of the big controversies, sticking points in our state is the private schools who are that are located in larger metro areas, yet with smaller student populations.
Yes.
We have one here in town. Even though Stevens Point's not a very big town, we have a school about the same size as mine that does okay, but then you've got, well, I don't need to belabor that, but did you take into account private and public at all?
Yeah. So I actually went around and I talked with a lot of coaches, and they brought that up to me. I didn't think about it, but they brought it up more in it's football, basketball, and volleyball. Those are the 3 sports. So boys football, boys and girls basketball, and girls volleyball. That the parochial schools or the private schools or magnet schools or whatever will recruit and bring talent into the district, or parents will actually decide to move somewhere to give their kid a better chance of earning an athletic scholarship on a better team. It doesn't happen in cross-country racing yet, but there is, this is trying to measure running size only and not taking into account all kinds of interesting, there's really good data on like socioeconomic factors. Running performance is highly correlated to socioeconomic. It's also correlated to like a suburb factor. The inner city schools have really poor cross-country teams. The remote, extreme, live in the farmland has pretty poor cross-country, but at the suburb areas where the good cross-country teams are, so that's where the wealth is also. So, and that's where you have access to running paths and trails and things like that. So those kinds of effects are more pronounced.
Just really well put together presentation. I was able to clearly see your reasoning slide to slide. I'm a little bit in awe of the number of data points that you were using, and were you able to get that information? You just kind of mentioned it, and I have to imagine the process for getting that data was not easy. Would that be a true statement?
The data, so the OSHA, the Governing Athletic Association, does not give data out. They were tight-lipped. They're not happy about this work. And so you have to fight them for the data to get that. And so I was able to get some of the data that was already publicly available. I did have to inquire with the State of Ohio School Board to get the school enrollment data. The running data was actually easy to get, but it was a little hard to curate. You had to do a lot of steps to just filter it for the right age groups and for right genders and things. There's always that mess of this is how much data curation you do and this is how much actual experimentation you do. And so there was some of that too. A lot of visualization steps, just, hey, does this thing make sense? So, and then there was like 1,000 graphs that I didn't put in the presentation that were just checks for me, just like, does this make sense? Does this look good? And those kind of things. But the data wasn't actually that hard to get. It was,
I missed this maybe at the beginning, but have you shown this to, who have you shown this to? I mean, have
Yeah.
OSHA seen this? Has OSHA seen it?
So, yeah, OSHA. So I'm trying to find a way, because obviously I'm from Granville, and this is, we actually went so far, our coach, not we, went so far as to actually file a lawsuit against OSHA about this, which didn't make a lot of friends. So you know, there's more work to do, but I'm trying to find a way to see if they're interested in having a presentation. I'm trying to make it a little more neutral and maybe take some of the team names out to just, you know, try to make it a little bit. But I think there's some valuable things in here that you could do, even without causing too much of a stir, to try to make the sport a little more equitable. This actually sort of the first time I think that anybody's ever given any kind of like statistical argument of why, how much unfairness there is, or so forth, or understanding where that unfairness comes from. As a note, last season, our team did finish third in the state. We just missed second by a few points, but we got killed by first place. And the two teams who beat us were two of the largest teams on the graph. And Mason, actually the largest school, finished fourth just behind us, so it was really nice to beat them.
Oh, that's awesome.
So, and this year we're in Division 2. So somehow, magically, OSHA's put us into Division 2. So I don't know what happened. Yeah.
I just was wondering, I mean, it seems sensible that this would play out similarly for boys cross country, but have you
Yes.
looked at that?
Yeah. So, and there's an interesting hypothesis. So I have to be a little careful here, but I'm saying this to my own two kids. My daughter matures at age 12, right? And my son is 14 and still hasn't grown yet. And so, you know, the effect is probably more pronounced in boys because when a freshman girl joins the team, they can literally join at an elite level and run as fast as the seniors in a lot of cases, and they still improve. But for boys, the freshman boys are just so much not as good as the senior boys. You just grow so much more as a boy during that time frame because you're still growing. So I would imagine that the school size effect is even worse for boys because the freshmen just can't contribute to the team. So you're really looking at your varsities comprised mostly of the upper class students.
Out of curiosity, why did you focus on girls cross country? Was that where?
That's my daughter's situation.
Okay,
Yeah,
sure.
so
okay.
yeah, so she
Yeah.
was living that moment, and they were
Yeah.
frustrated about it. So that's I just picked girls out of boys for that reason. So
Not that I'm arguing, but I was just curious.
yeah. Well, we should probably get down there. So. I have preprints of papers on both these topics, so if anybody's interested, and the papers.